Returning to one of our top stories, the Prime Minister's push to tighten hate speech laws has hit a hurdle. After demanding that Parliament return early, the Coalition now is not happy with how the proposal has been drafted. Let's speak to the Shadow Energy Minister, Tehan, for more on this. Dan, we'll see you back here in Canberra next week. A growing number of your colleagues, though, not waiting for the formal position of the party. Andrew Hastie, Jacinta Price, the latest to say they cannot vote for what they've seen. Do you share those concerns?
Well, what we've seen is an abject failure of leadership from the Prime Minister from the word go, sadly, on this issue. And what we need to see from him now is to put politics aside and get absolutely serious about uniting the people, the Australian people, and making sure that we can address this issue which is driven by anti-Semitism in a bipartisan way. Now, my advice for the Prime Minister would be to pick up the phone to Susan Lee and say, let's sit down, let's work through this over the weekend so that we've got a united position that we can put to the Parliament next week, instead of the approach that he's taking, which is all about division. And sadly, we're seeing that play out in Australian society. This is not leading to social cohesion that we all hoped it would lead to. What we're seeing is more and more division, and that is on the hands of the Prime Minister because he is failing to lead us through this crisis.
Dan, has the opposition put forward amendments in good faith to the government that they can look at, or is this public posturing? We saw the criticism from Susan Lee last hour. She says the bill is virtually unworkable. How could you possibly redraft it that would see the Coalition back it?
Well, we would be happy to try. We would be happy to try and fix it if the Prime Minister would act in good faith, but he won't. What he did was he lobbed this huge piece of legislation on the Parliament, which no one had the time to see. He's then said, all right, there will be a 2-day or 3-day parliamentary inquiry, which is simply not long enough to look at the detail and the complexity around this issue. And then he just played the most blatant politics that you could ever see by then lobbying gun law reform in with this issue. Now, I can tell you, everyone has seen it for what it is. It's blatant politics, and it's time the Prime Minister acted like a true leader during a national crisis. Instead of these games, you know what it reminds me of? It's the way Dan Andrews used to lead in Victoria, and it's like he's a chip off the old block. He just wants to play politics with everything and will not unite on an important issue, one of the most important issues that this country has faced for decades.
I want to ask you about guns, but just on this point about it being rushed. It seems like a hard argument for the Coalition to mount. It's rushed at the very same time Susan Lee called for Parliament to be back before Christmas. That would have been even more rushed legislation in terms of getting the details right, which we need to on hate speech laws.
Not at all, not at all. What we could have done is we could have had the commemorative service like we're going to rightly on Monday, but we could have done that before Christmas, which would have been the right time to do that. And then we could have begun the process of sitting down and working in a bipartisan way on addressing the issue that was before us. And we could have outlined general principles. We could have got a bipartisan committee formed that could have worked over the last 3 to 4 weeks to then be able to present to the Parliament something that we were all united about. Instead, the Prime Minister had to be led kicking and screaming to appoint a Royal Commission. We all know he tried to wait it out and tried to see whether Christmas and New Year would mean that a focus would be lost and we wouldn't have to have a Royal Commission. And then all of a sudden he's just dropped this legislation on the Parliament without giving it proper time, and he could have begun the consultation on this before Christmas. He chose not to. He chose to play politics, and everyone can see it for what it is. I can tell you out in my community, they just say to me, why the hell is the Prime Minister doing it this way? Because it just seems all about politics, nothing about the national interest. And if ever there was an issue that needed us to address it through the national interest, it's this one. And that's why it's such an abject failure of leadership from the Prime Minister, sadly.